Donkey Kong 94. So I've always wondered about this game. I've never played it growing up. I never had an original Game Boy, despite the Game Boy and I premiering in the same year. Haha! Regardless, I did see this game previewed in an older Nintendo Power, which confused me, as I never played this Mario game before. Regardless, I didn't really hear about this game until a YouTuber or two talked about this game, reminding me that it was a thing and not just some fever dream that I saw pictures of. However, I wasn't planning on giving this game its own video. Originally, I was going to kind of review this when I played Mario vs. Donkey Kong. But a lot of people talked about this game when talking about the arcade games. I'll admit, I was curious, and this game was a game that I eventually wanted to play. Actually, many people probably associate this game more with the SNES than the Game Boy, since it was advertised heavily with the Super Game Boy game. The Super Game Boy was an SNES cartridge that allowed you to play Game Boy games on your SNES and TV. Often gave you extra colors and some borders and such. However, I'm playing this on the 3DS. Yeah, I don't have a Super Game Boy cartridge or even an SNES to play it on. As of yet. Regardless, I think the game works perfectly fine in black and white. This game is one of the many classics that I missed out on when growing up. And like I said, a lot of people talk about this with the arcade games. I decided to do the same, but then something occurred to me. This was a long game for a Game Boy game. Hell, it's one of the longer games in general for the 90s. This is also not just a version of Donkey Kong, the arcade game. This is a remake plus a full-blown sequel. So with that, and the length of the canon appearance of DK Jr. in the lore, nah, forget it. This is going to get its own video. This is also the main reason that this is now a Donkey Kong marathon instead of a month of, like it was supposed to be. So let's do it. Let's take on Donkey Kong! Round 2. So the game starts out, and Donkey kidnaps Pauline just like before. You move through the original levels of Donkey Kong like you would, and you rescue her. Except Donkey Kong decides 4 levels just aren't enough for a 1994 game, and grabs her again, taking off. This is where things get interesting. You see many cutscenes of Mario chasing Donkey through various places, including on a ship, on a plane. There are cutscenes showing this on a Game Boy game. That's actually kind of interesting. Eventually, Donkey Kong Jr. gets into the mix and starts really messing with you. And eventually, you have to trap him towards the end of the game. When you eventually get to the final area, which is a giant tower, you defeat Donkey Kong and send him flying into a bunch of poisonous mushrooms. Oops. Unlike what DK Jr. has been throwing at you, these ones aren't poisonous, but super mushrooms. Donkey naturally turns into a giant, which is referenced in Smash Bros. Constantly. You defeat him again and get Pauline off the tower to a nearby clearing, which turns out this is all in the Mushroom Kingdom. Wait, you're telling me this is how Mario ends up in the Mushroom Kingdom for the first time? Wow, that's a lot to take in. Wow. Some canon world building, huh? Yeah, Mario even turns to Super Mario for the first time here. That's pretty awesome, all things considered. And all things considered, this scene looks amazing. Pauline dons her more iconic look in this game. I actually thought that was in honor of Mario vs. Donkey Kong, but nope, it actually started here. Given, she looks really small in the game, and Mario isn't much bigger. But Donkey Kong looks great, even in-game. He's expressive and often moons the camera. Donkey Kong Jr. looks great too. And so does the enemies and items, though I thought Pauline's hat was an enemy for like the longest time, looking at the photographs from the magazine I mentioned earlier. Regardless, this game can look really great for a Game Boy game, and I played it in black and white. As stated earlier, this game does have some color options. If you play it in the Super Game Boy or Game Boy Color, the color palette increases pretty well. I didn't have those options for this, but they're there. The different areas all have different themes in the levels and backgrounds too, making all the levels look pretty unique in their respective worlds. That's awesome. The music is probably the weaker part of this review. It's still good, don't get me wrong, and it works all things considered, but none of the tracks stand out to me either. The soundtrack isn't as jumpy as Mario Land. Hell, some of these tunes almost sound creepy at first, but overall it does work for the game. Still, this game looks really good all things considered, and it's an 8-bit Game Boy game that made Donkey Kong look far more expressive than the NES ever did. Also, this game teaches you how to play very well. The cutscenes that play every so often in between worlds will actually teach you how to do certain moves and teach you about moves that you're going to need relatively soon. That's really, really cool. Now, if you're thinking, wait, Sauron, why does this game need a way to teach you new moves? And yeah, you'd think this wouldn't be too complicated. There's only 2 buttons, right? Nope, Mario is actually incredibly versatile in this game. Mario can jump over obstacles, use hammers like a weapon or invincibility power-up, and he can climb ladders. That's no big deal. However, Mario can also swim, pick up certain enemies and items from like Mario Bros. 2, and can jump from a crouched position. This lets him do a handstand and jump even higher or block barrels coming from above. He can snap to the opposite direction and jump just like in Mario 64. Actually, this game predates Mario 64, so that game got the move from here. He can climb vines like Donkey Kong Jr., he can use ropes to swing like in Sunshine, he can use blocks to build ladders and platforms for a limited amount of time, he can throw hammers up to catch them on the next platform, making them more versatile too. Mario has a ton of moves to help solve puzzles and platform his way to Donkey Kong in an effort to save Pauline. Or he can pick up and throw keys around a lot. So in this particular game, there are 3 basic types of levels: puzzle levels, Donkey Kong levels, and boss fights. Puzzle levels are the most common. There are a few that gave me shit too. One I had to look up a guide because I was lost on it, but most of them are pretty decent. Outside of a time or two, the timing or platforming placement was picky. Most of the levels were actually really fun to figure out. Not easy, but fun and rewarding. There are a few times solving the puzzles to beat the level filled me with a aha moment, and that's really cool, figuring out how to, work the puzzles. The point of these is that there's a locked door and a big-ass key nearby. Your job is to move the key to the door and get out of the level. The key can be thrown and dropped, but it can't leave Mario's hand for too long or it will respawn back to its original placement. You will carry the key or throw it into nearby platforms to move it to the door very quickly to get out of the level. The Donkey Kong stages are the ones that pop up that are very similar to and continuations of the original Donkey Kong levels. Sure, the first 4 levels are ripped straight out of Donkey Kong, but there's a lot that feels similar to those levels, but with new designs and challenges. These are so fun! They normally pop out every 4th level that isn't a boss fight, but the entire last world is full of these. 2 of them even replicate Donkey Kong Jr. levels, but, playing as Mario trapping Donkey Kong Jr. This is where the game feels like a proper sequel. You are dodging enemies or barrels to confront Donkey Kong up front, though be careful about getting too awfully close. Now the boss fights, they're okay. What you do is you normally work your way up to Donkey Kong and throw something at him. You throw an enemy or a barrel a couple of times and there you go. These are piss easy and even the final fight isn't too awfully special. Until Donkey Kong grows huge. Then things get overly challenging, but it's still pretty fun. Now yes, some of the levels are pretty hard, but that's what lives are for. There's often a really obviously placed extra life when you enter a new or very challenging level. And unfortunately, that's pretty much the only reason to explore too. You can find Pauline's hat, purse, and parasol in every level. Get them for extra points. If you collect them all, you get a mini game to gain lives. I maxed out at 99 at one point in the game. It's pretty easy to manipulate. But outside of that and boosting high scores for even more lives, there's really nothing more to do in the game besides, the main game. Overall, this game is amazing. One of the true gems the Game Boy library has to offer. And every puzzle or platforming fan should play this. There are very few minor flaws in level design and charm, but the story is fun and the visuals are great. The music's okay and the levels are mostly really, really fun. The gameplay has a lot going for it just with 2 buttons. The only major issue here is that there's not really much to do outside the main game. But, realistically, this game has over 100 levels, right? Still, a harder mode or a level select would have been really fun. At least you don't have one of the things you have to look up for online. Regardless, this game is amazing. A true 9 out of 10. If you are in the market for a brain tester or a good puzzle platformer, try this out. You can get it on the 3DS eShop for now, but be quick. Outside of that, pirate life for me. Speaking of pirates, Donkey Kong Country Trilogy is up next. Like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell for live updates, and take care, my minions, as we continue this Donkey Kong marathon.